What's up? What's up? Deuces Cracked members, Jumbo Prey, aka Casino Crime here. We've got another video for you this week. Hey, last week I said that I was going to do a heads up series, and I tried valiantly to do so, although I had a Camtasia problem. I recorded about a 2 hour session of me playing shorthanded, 6 max, and going to war a little bit heads up with a couple of different players. But I had a system crash, unfortunately. Didn't save my video, and that was frustrating for me. But I do still have the hand histories, or many of them, that I played during this session. It was like a 600 or so hand session, and I thought there were some interesting spots, so I thought I didn't really want, I wanted to salvage the session somehow, and I thought there was actually several interesting hands that came up. Uh, and I'm going to actually click off show note cards. There we go. So, yeah, so I thought we could still go over them and talk a little bit about some adjustments that I make kind of in game, taking notes on players, adjusting to different stack sizes, and playing against different regs. Because this session was played on America's Card Room, which is the winning poker network, which I will add has seemed to have pretty good mid-stakes action as I've been monitoring it the last couple of weeks. So for you American guys, that's a good sign. And from what I know, payouts are pretty good. So I don't know. I wouldn't. If you're looking for a place to grind, I would certainly recommend that place. I kind of like it because it's in my wheelhouse of being able to use a HUD and battle regs. Like, the games on Bovada, from my understanding, are perhaps softer than on America's Card Room. On America's Card Room, there is like kind of a lot of grinders and whatnot, but um, I think that the games are still pretty good. I personally kind of like going to war with people when I know who they are and I can develop reads on them over time. That's always been my wheelhouse, more than like kind of just firing away at anonymous people. So anyhow, here's the first hand that we played. This guy, who my read would be that he's an aggressive regular, definitely a thinker. I think that he thought that I was like playing maybe aggressively and badly and spearing a little bit because he was sitting at a couple of different tables, which is kind of true, I guess, to some degree. This player, Mr. Wonder UL 89, he and I were playing heads up for quite a while at 2-4 until this ringer guy sat. My read on him would be that he's actually pretty tricky. Like, he seems to play pretty well post flop. Certainly capable of taking some advanced lines. It's tough to say like how big of a winner he is. I would assume he's like a pretty big winner because I always see him playing. And I don't know. I mean, I was still trying to feel out his game a little bit and see which spots that I can attack. But that was my read, is that he's just like basically a able, competent reg, and his range is a lot tighter when we were playing three-handed than it was heads up. I decided to squeeze here. I don't always squeeze, although I suspected that ringer, and I want to double click here to see what his stats were for this specific three-handed thing. So it says actually he's only stealing 39%. I felt like at the time, like most players, it's going to be higher here. And the reason I chose to squeeze was I thought that Mr. Wonder UL's range was very high card heavy. I figured he would 3-bet a lot of his premium aces and kings. And I hadn't been squeezing too terribly much, although it says that I was 3-betting aggressively. I thought that most of the time, the button would fold or he would 4-bet me and I could call a 4-bet with this hand. And, even if I got to play a heads up, what I thought would happen most of the time was that I would play a heads up pot in position against Wonder UL with a deceptive hand that played, pretty well against or at least fairly well against small blind peeling range heads up. So I wouldn't squeeze here if I thought that both players were going to call me. Certainly, I squeeze here a lot when I think the button is going to fold. If I had and I also squeeze here a lot less if I have a hand that plays poorly against 4-bets. And especially like in three-handed, it's important to take your image into consideration. You don't want to squeeze light with a hand that doesn't play well against light 4-bets when you're likely to get light 4-bet. So what I'm getting at is, like, if you have a bad image and you have a hand like ace queen 9-8 with a suit, like, that's a bad hand to squeeze because it plays really poorly against a 4-bet, and it's a hand that can take a lot of flops and play well in that way. So I'd prefer to either squeeze very strong here, or a hand that I'm willing to like get it in with, or I would prefer to squeeze a hand like this that's like deceptive and plays well against light four bets. And I think that this is one of those hands. So I do squeeze, the button does fold, and Mr. UL calls, and the rest of the hand is pretty standard. I mean, I pot the flop, which is fine. Like, I prefer potting here rather than betting small because, maybe he could find a tight fold with like just an overpair of jacks or something. I mean, if he has like an overpair and a gutter or like a pair and a gutter, he's clearly just going to get it in anyway. But I thought that, this is a fine line for me to take if I have aces or whatever hand. So I just thought that there's on this board there's no reason to really, and in this situation there's no reason to bet smaller and like induce a call because like although my hand is certainly good enough to play for stacks with, I would prefer him just to fold whatever equity he has because certainly whatever hand he called from the small blind with has a 25 to 45% equity against me, and I wanted to fold, but we do turn very nicely and win the pot against an overpair and a gutter. So standard, but I thought that pre-flop was fun to talk about. Okay, this hand's another short one, and you'll see that I included in this video, I included all of like they're all going to be winning hands. And I didn't really do that for a specific reason. I just kind of was like going through my session and the winning hands were at the top. But depending on how long this video goes, I will like save my losers for next time. I don't want to, certainly it's not like I'm only reviewing hands that I win, but you'll notice a trend where I do win all these. But I included them because I think that some of them are small and interesting spots. And maybe I thought that they would help you guys. So here the reason I included this hand was just to talk shortly about four betting. I made a video not long ago that focused just on playing four bet pots and how you should be sort of interpreting four betting. And I think, as I mentioned, I was I believe this was towards the end of the session. And this player and I, we had been, as I mentioned, we'd been playing a lot of heads up and he seemed aggressive and capable. So like, while most of the time, like if it's a default player and I don't have any reads, I'm really like not thrilled about getting 4-bet here when I open from middle position and get 4-bet from the small. That usually is like a really strong range of hands. But I'd sort of developed the read on this guy that he knew how different ranges interacted with each other, and I thought it was more likely that he was 3-betting like rundowns versus me than he would be like just aces. And the reason is because of my image. Like look at this table when I'm playing like 45, 41. I'm just like kind of going out of my mind. These are, if I saw these stats and I didn't know it was me, I would say this player's ultra aggressive. I mean, 3-betting 32%. The main reason that and this is something that's actually pretty cool, is when I'm playing a session, my stats will be dramatically different on every table. And that's because the way that I adjust my pre-flop ranges, it is very highly dependent on who I have position on. So we'll see like here, AC Prota, he was playing pretty terribly in my opinion. Like, although his stats don't look like he was playing awful, early on he had some really fishy stats and it seemed like he was just playing terribly. So I was like 3-betting him relentlessly. And so that's why like my 3-bet is so high, my aggression is so high, because I was kind of just going after him. And I think that it's important to pay attention to your image. Like if you're really going off, then this hand is just the nuts against anyone that's like thinking at all. Just because like players have to notice if you're playing this aggressively, and this becomes an easy 4-bet. And we just end up winning the hand. But more than anything, what I wanted to talk about was like the pre-flop reads and developing reads against players. Like it's important. It would be important for me when I see this hand get turned over to write that down and say, hey, like he's 3-betting rundowns out of the small facing a middle position open. I do actually think that that's relevant, and it's important to know that that's in his range. And when I'm taking notes on players, especially regs, I like to take note of which hands they're 3-betting in position and out of position, if it's rundown heavy or if it's big pair heavy. Here we get Jack 10-5 deuce double suited and open from the cutoff. And we can see on this table I had pretty aggressive stats as well, trying to get involved in some pots. Our reg friend here, Mr. UL89, calls from the small blind. We flop bottom 2 and a poor flush draw. C-bet and get check raised. Okay, so this is kind of an interesting spot, I thought. hey, like on the surface to a lot of players, we could kind of assume that bottom two in a flush draw is like, wow, I mean, we should just be snap getting it in. But I don't think that that's necessarily the case. We're pretty deep, and I've mentioned before that when the SPR is like, 10 and above, it's pretty bad to just be ripping it in on flops where you're either flipping or fucked. And I think that this is a good example of that. If he has top set or if he has like 5-8 with a flush draw, we're going to get it in very, very bad. So with the SPR the way it is, being like more than 20, in my opinion, it's better to just peel and see how the hand develops and get some more information and maybe try to get the showdown with just like our bottom two. Like, the other side of that is these are good boards for competent players like to attack, right? And something I've noticed is that with the progression of the game, back in the day, the most popular boards to attack were like monotone boards and paired boards, or like ace ace x boards, or king king, those types of boards. And now like a lot of competent players have caught on to that fact, so they're less willing to give up on those boards as easy. So I see a lot of players nowadays like attacking these boards, which is a good thing. So it could be that, especially since we're deeper, he kind of just felt that like he knows that I'm aggressive. He knows that I'm c-betting a lot, so he's gonna just be like putting in light raises on this board with like backdoor flush draws and like a gutter type hands or something like that. So he certainly will have lighter hands in his range. I'm not saying he's only nutted, but it's important to, of course, like just because he could have some lighter hands in his range, not to just be ripping it in here. So calling is best in my opinion. The turn is very nice actually. It's a deuce and it gives us a boat, and I like this card because it's deceptive. I mean, in our opponent's eyes, we would have just probably re-raised a set, like a set of eights or a set of fives. And so it really kind of, it makes a boat like pretty unlikely in our opponent's eyes. So I know that he's going to continue with bluffs, which is nice, and expect to take it down a lot. And it's just going to keep all of his like weak hands in his range. So that's really good for us. Again, but just calling. I mean, I considered raising for value just because it might look bluffy and he could spaz. That's certainly possible. But again, like I thought there was also some possibility that we were beat. So I wanted to make sure that I kept in his air. And that's pretty much it. He bet 40 on the turn. On the river, I mean, there's an argument to be made for jamming, I guess. Maybe you get called by like a backdoored flush. But I don't know. I think that calling is certainly just the best. It is possible that we're still beat. His sizing is indicative of maybe a weak hand. Although I think he's probably pretty balanced here. So I think that calling is still just the best. We can see that like he flopped a gutty and a backdoor flush draw and a backdoor straight draw. Rivered the nut flush and was probably pretty surprised to see that I had bottom, like the nut worst boat there. Okay, here we open from the cutoff with Jack 10 10 5 double suited, get called by the button, and get called by the big blind. So it looks like we've been playing pretty tight at this table. It's tough to say, like, I'm sure that Mr. Wonder UL and Ringer have pretty good reads on us, but our image with the other players is probably pretty tight, I would say. And I actually included this hand because I wanted to talk about, later street visibility and kind of my overall approach in these situations. Basically, I decided to check, and although I think that betting is fine, my reasoning for checking was that I thought that the button would stab here pretty wide. Mostly because most people would think that I would, he doesn't really typically have to worry about me having check raises in my range. It's not a spot that people will go for check raises as much in multi-way pots. So I thought that like it would be nice because if he does stab, I can put in a pretty big check raise, especially if a roused whale calls. But if I bet, I'm in such a tough spot on later streets without a backdoor flush draw. So I kind of prefer to play this as like play my hand like slower and deceptively and try to check raise and get the money in quick, or play it deceptively and allow get to see it turn and like see how the board develops. Now, if I had a backdoor flush draw, I would have bet the flop because I have more turns that I can continue my aggression on out of position profitably. But here, like, I think that it's going to be, although I do have like the quote unquote nuts on this flop, um, it's the board's going to change in so many different ways, and I basically will almost like it's pretty easy for me to lose the pot unless I fill up. So I decided to actually check. And it's cool because, I'm going to be check giving up here a lot, so it's nice to have some check jams in my range when most of the time I just check give up. So it allows regs to not punish you as hard. It does check through, and I just pot the turn because I think now it's pretty clear that, I could eat, like my hand kind of looks like a draw. People are going to be less likely to float me wide, but I also think that facing two players, it's pretty clear that they're going to have a hand that's capable of calling at least one bet, so I may as well charge them the maximum when I have the best hand. Of course, we river the 8, and a mistake that I see a lot of like new players make is they like check here trying to slow play, but it's one of those spots where people just like check back and try to get the showdown so much, and it's rare that people have like floats. Like, I don't know. I just find that people like rarely bet when they check, so it's good to just bet it yourself, especially when your hand looks like a misdraw. You can expect to get called a lot lighter. What's also nice is that he has 8x a lot more in his range, which I think will always call us, because we have 10s full. So, cool hand. And on ACR, for whatever reason, they don't show when it's not all in, so we can't see what he had, but I would assume he had a flush or an 8. Okay, here's another hand where like I bet pretty big on the river for value. So I 3-bet pre when I was playing heads up against that Wonder UL guy with a nice hand, ace, queen, jack, 3 double suited, and he calls. We put flop very nice, top pair, an open ender, and a gut shot, and 2 backdoor flush draws. I decided to check. This is most of the time I would just bet here because our hand is very strong. We're okay getting it in on this flop. But I kind of was check giving up a lot, so I wanted to put some check raises in my range. And I thought he would stab a lot, so my plan was to check raise, but looking back, I kind of prefer, in general, to just like bet here, because we're going to get peeled a lot on this flop by a worse queen and like 6-7 type hands, and because we have 2 backdoor flush draws, there's just going to be a lot of turns that we can continue our aggression on comfortably. So I prefer betting in general, but just because of the dynamic of the match, I decided to check because I thought I would get a lot of stabs. And he checks back, and I thought that on the flop, he would have bet all of his value hands, and now it's likely he either just has air and isn't going to stab anyway on this board, or he picked up a draw, or he has, I don't know. I just think 6-7 is very unlikely since a lot of his 6-7 combos stab the flop, so I'm not really worried about 6-7. So I prefer to just like bet and take it down, or just like bet for value. And he calls, and we river ace queen, and I think it's just a good spot to pot it because I have a very aggressive image, as you can see, and I think one pair hands would fold to a small bet anyway, like or like a standard value bet size. So why not pot it? Because I think that 2 pairs will never fold if he did river like ace 8 or he had like 8-5 somehow, and I think that's certainly possible. He's not going to fold that against me, so I prefer to just pot it, especially with a bad image. If you have a tight image, this is a bad spot to pot it. If you have a bad image, this is a good spot to pot it. So I pot it and he calls, but again, we can't see what he has. Here I have ace, king, queen, jack with a suit and open for pot. Get called by the regular from the other hands on the button. We flop very nice, 9-10 deuce rainbow. I see bet, and if I could go for a check raise on this board, I would. But I think that it's a board where you get floated so much. And the thing that's nice is I do believe that since he has a lot of like open enders that float pair and gut shots and just like pair X, like 10X, any 10X type hands, you'll get a lot of floats from hands where like they'll bet the turn when you complete your hand, which is nice. So I prefer to just bet and build a pot with a hand that's very strong. We have big wrap and a backdoor flush draw, so that's nice. So I prefer to just bet, although sometimes I will check raise here against the right player. But you can kind of see my sizing. I actually like my sizing because it's small. I really do induce a lot of floats here. Nobody wants to just give up to like a 60% pot bet on this flop when they have position. they kind of just like say fuck you, I call, you know. Okay, so actually this is an interesting turn, and the reason that I included this hand was because I wanted to talk a little bit about combinatorics and hand reading, and normally I would bet here, but I actually decided to check because it was my read that, again, like number one, I bet pretty small on the flop, and so I thought he would have a lot more floats in his range. So not necessarily just like the Jack 8-7s or the 6-7-8s or the like Jack Queen 10s, right? Like he's going to have any pair in sidecards. And I thought that this was a good turn for the floating piece of his range to take a stab now. And I thought that like the floating piece of his range, if I kept betting, would actually fold. And I also thought that he would certainly like value bet worse straights. So like if he made Jack 7 or 6-7, although those would certainly call a turn barrel, they'll bet themselves. So my thinking was that if he's going to, you know, if he's going to like fold his air, but he's going to bet all of the hands that I would have gotten value out of himself, that it's a good spot for me to just like check call. So I do check call. And then I thought that it was like, because I had taken this line, I was confident that this player could value bet any straight because it looks like I have like aces or two pair. So I really was confident that he could have air here sometimes, or he could value bet a worse straight himself. So I decided to check. But he checks back and actually shows king 10. So but I think that my play is pretty good. But it's just kind of unfortunate that he did river two pair. I'm confident that if the river was like a 6 or like some other brick, he would have bluffed. But I thought it was a fun one to talk about what his range actually was. Okay, here we have ace, king, queen 4 with a nut suit and raise a weak player's limp. We see bet 10 into 18. He calls. We pot the turn, which, just because I chose a smaller sizing on the flop, I thought he could have a lot of like just random flush draws or maybe like bottom 2 that would fold now. So I thought that this was a good bet to get him off of it, especially since I do have a nice wrap. But he calls, and the river's a jack. So this is a spot where I think a lot of players, they screw up and they like say, oh shit, like I potted the turn, now I gotta like pot the river. But that's not really the case. You have to think of it this way. If he has trip jacks, this type of player is never going to fold to you anyway. If he filled up, of course, he's going to call. Even if he has like queen 9, like a slow played queen 9, which you'll come across occasionally, I think people just kind of like close their eyes and call. So we don't have anything, but it's pretty likely given the run out that he has a lot of missed draws. And missed draws are going to fold no matter how much you bet. So I think it's smarter to, rather than potting it, to choose a smaller sizing just because, like I said, you're never getting raised here as a bluff given the action. And this gives you a lot better price on your bluff in a spot where your opponent will have a lot of missed draws. So in these situations, like although in many cases, like when you triple barrel, it's better to pot when your opponent clearly has like a bluff catcher because you want to maximize fold equity. In a situation where the majority of your range is like either a really nutted hand or a missed draw, then it's better to bet smaller like we did here. And he folds. Okay, and for the last hand of this session, I thought it would be fun to do this one in Poker Juice because I thought it was a pretty interesting hand. So I wanted to analyze it from more of a numbers perspective. And this is, for the record, this is basically the same thing that I do after I play a session, is some of the hands I really want to develop a better knowledge of the frequencies in which I run into hands and analyze my play kind of just, more than just using my like spidey senses. I want to really know the numbers and know how bad or good my play is. So the button in this hand is actually the Wonder UL 89 guy that we were playing earlier. He's a reg. We had been playing heads up for a while, and now like a third player had joined us. But we already had like quite a bit of history from playing heads up. So he opens the button for 12, and I 3-bet to 40, and he calls. Of course, this is like very standard so far. Double suited kings, pretty great hand to 3-bet in short-handed PLO. Now, the important thing here is how we put in the syntax in Poker Juice, right? Like I put in first in 50%, which I think is fair. Like my steal percentage for him had been about 50%. And something most people will point out is that like because I three bet and because he called that we can why didn't I exclude pocket aces from his range, or like why didn't I give him a four betting range? And I'll tell you why, and it's because the reason is because he actually smooth called pocket aces to a three bet of mine a couple of different times when we were playing heads up, that got to showdown. So for me, that's an important read, right? Like it means that I don't know if he never four bets aces, or maybe it was just against me, or he was like trapping. But there was a couple of different cases where he had just called pre-flop with aces. So I'm really not sure that he would four bet all of his aces combinations, which is like one thing that made this hand pretty interesting, as we'll see in a moment. So we flopped the nut flush on ace three deuce monotone. We bet 36 into 84, and he called. And the turn is interesting, right? It's an offsuit deuce. So now we lose to ace deuce. We lose to we lose to like threes full, of course, and aces full. But the thing is again, like my read was that although I had seen him call a couple of different times with pocket aces pre, I thought that at least some of his combinations of aces would four bet pre, right? So in my opinion, I was thinking at the time that he was more like wheel heavy or flush heavy. So what I did here in Poker Juice is I asked it. I said, how often does he have the wheel or a flush? And I want to know. Well, I guess it also includes these. So let's just take this out. So, and I also, I basically wanted to know how often he had like a wheel or a boat. And let's go back to the flop. So he has like four on the flop. He has. Let's put it back into. Let's just do like 2-2 or better. So set or better. So actually, it's about like a quarter of the time that he has a set or a flush, right? And what this number up here means is like our equity against that subrange. So we have like 90% against equity against like any flush and any set on the flop. But then on the turn, but what this number shows us is that he only has one of those hands a quarter of the time. And I mean, when we're playing monotone boards, the consideration that it's a lot less likely he has just pure floats, right? Because we have the king of hearts. A hand that a lot of players would float with would be like the king of hearts, so that they could take it away later. But it'd be pretty rare for someone to just float with like the queen of hearts or like the jack of hearts. So I think that when you get called on the flop, you can kind of remove all of his floats. And so he really should have like just bluff catchers, which would be wheels, two pairs, and sets. So I kind of wanted to know how often now like I actually am beat. And what I really wanted to know was how often it's just a flush, because the thing is, let me see here. So I wanted to know just flush, and then let's see, ace, 3, 2, 2. Okay, good. Ace, deuce, or I guess deuce 3. Okay. So I kind of wanted to divide the range into like what would be, and we can see when we pull a thing over here. Moment. Second. Well, it should show our hands. Well, it's not coming up. But basically, like the reason that I put this in was, I want to see what his range is made of, like how much of it is flushes, and how much of it is like boats. And you can see that actually his range is a lot heavier with flushes, which is good to know. Like if I'm looking to get value, what I should be basically thinking about getting value from is his flushes and not be so scared of boats. So I thought it was like interesting to see that, about a quarter of the time on the flop, he'll have like any type of hand. And then on the turn, like I'm gonna be beat really only like 8% of the time. And although and this is, if you're playing somebody and they have four betting range of like a set, aces in their range, then you're probably like never gonna be beat. So instead of like what a lot of players do is check and try to, like be scared of the nuts, it's more important, I think, to like get value. So I bet the turn and he called, and I honestly, when he called the turn, I was a little bit scared because I thought that I checked the river because I really was confident that like there wasn't any value in jamming the river because I thought that he would fold a flush but only call when I was beat. As it happened, like the river went check check, and again like on ACR, you don't get to see their hands at showdown. So, but it's pretty clear that he had a flush, so we won. Okay, well that was a good hand history review for today. What I'm gonna do, I'm gonna call it quits, and I actually am going to go play a 3K live no limit tournament, no, 2 card no limit tournament, Hold'em that is, and hopefully I win. So hopefully you guys liked this. I'll do some more hand histories next week if you'd like. Someone sent me a video to review. I would like to review that in the near future, and I would like to also make a video playing, kind of going to war with some people. I actually messaged this Wonder UL guy when I was playing him and asked him if he would like to 2-table at like some Midstakes at some point for a couple of hours so that I can get some footage. So hopefully I can do that. Good luck, guys. Take care. Let me know what you think of the forums and give me some feedback.